The forecast today, it is going to be a toasty one. We have temperatures pushing back to the mid 80s. Same thing tomorrow. Chance for rain this weekend. Next week, upper 70s, low 80s.
All right, that'll do it for Fox 32 News.
From the Cook County Department of Public Health, they've confirmed the first human West Nile virus-related death in suburban Cook County and Illinois this year. And joining us to break all of this down and explain exactly what this means is Dr. Rachel Rubin. Dr. Rubin, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
What do we know about this death? Who was impacted? Do we have any idea where this person lives?
Yes, we know where the person lives. It's a tragic death, and we cannot divulge specific information about the individual for privacy reasons, but to know that many people like this individual are at risk for contracting West Nile virus and potentially a lethal case, such as in this unfortunate incident.
What do people need to look out for? You know, typically around this time of year, we start to see those temperatures fall. We think less mosquitoes, but because we are seeing this warm up, what are some things that people need to be aware of when they're outside or even in their homes?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have an acronym, the 3 R's, that we use for education about preventing exposure to mosquitoes. West Nile virus is a disease that is transmitted from birds to mosquitoes to then humans. Humans do not pass it from one person to another. So what people need to do to keep themselves safe are several things within their home is to, remove any standing water around your homes. So that means maybe you don't have bird baths. You don't have water barrels in your backyard. You don't have used tires, which are breeding grounds for mosquitoes if you have old tires in your backyard, either for recreation to mess around with or from an old car. So anything like that that contain water, remove that from around your home. The second thing is repel. So when you do go outside, and it's best to avoid going outside during the times of day that mosquitoes are most active, which are dusk and dawn, basically throughout the night, but mainly at dusk and dawn, and to use an EPA certified insect repellent that contains DEET or an equivalent insecticide, and to use that appropriately. And there are, you can buy them in any Walgreens or CVS or any pharmacy, and you can get, or grocery stores, and make sure that if it's for your children, that it's a slightly lower concentration and that you get that for your children and for adults, and apply that repellent. And then the last thing is what we call repair. So if you have screen doors, screen windows, screen porches, make sure that those screens are repaired and do not have holes in them so that mosquitoes cannot get into your home.
Let me ask you this, because we are in a season where people have allergies, people are catching colds, the flu's out there as well. Are there any key symptoms that people need to look out for to know that they may have contracted this virus?
That's unfortunately the answer to that is no. West Nile virus, at least in its most mild and moderate forms, can indeed feel like you have a cold or the flu. So it can be a mild fever, fatigue, feeling a little bit under the weather, headache. Sometimes you have a bit of a rash. And these things usually are mild and go away. And individuals do not advance to a more severe disease. In fact, many people can get it and be totally asymptomatic. But luckily, it cannot be transmitted person to person. But there are some individuals that can get very serious disease where it affects the brain and the central nervous system, and you get what's called an encephalitis, or inflammation of the brain that can cause brain damage and potentially death. And individuals that are most at risk for getting the most severe form of West Nile virus are older folks and individuals that have underlying chronic medical conditions that affect their immune systems and ability to fight off infection.
I'm looking at the information that the Cook County Department of Public Health put out, and I think it's important for anyone watching this or sees this later to know the risk of West Nile virus in suburban Cook County remains high. Can you explain why it remains high and really what the concern is there for the population at large?
Sure. What it means by it remains high is that we are still measuring activity of West Nile virus in mosquitoes. We can see how much of the mosquito population, we can estimate how much the mosquito population is infected with the West Nile virus. And we are still seeing pools of mosquitoes that test positive for West Nile. So that's why we are still considered high. Usually it begins to wane by this time of the year, but because we've had such hot days and wet days for mosquito breeding, is that we still are seeing a high level of risk at this particular point. We do imagine as we begin to get cooler days or more of them, as time goes by over the next several weeks, that the risk will diminish.
Let me ask you this. In terms of the numbers, and when I say numbers, I'm talking about the people that have actually had West Nile virus this year compared to last year, including this fatality. Have we seen those numbers go up this year, or are they down compared to last year?
They're up. They are up some this year, but we have to understand that taking these numbers, you need to put them in perspective. We have only diagnosed a handful of West Nile virus cases this year, and it's about double of last year. But that's not saying a lot, because most people that get West Nile virus don't even know they have it. They either have it asymptomatic, so they don't know at all, or they have some other kind of, they have symptoms and they think it's related to something else. And so we've had 33 cases that we know of. So these are people that have had symptoms serious enough that they present to a medical provider or facility and they get tested for it. So then we know. But we can imagine that the real numbers are multiples of that 33. And I think that what's driving the increase is indeed climate change.
I want you to talk about that. I do want to point out the fact you mentioned, maybe the numbers may not be true, concrete numbers, because some people are asymptomatic. Some of the symptoms could be fever, headache, rash, body aches 3 to 15 days after infection. And if it's really severe, you could see high fever, stiff neck, confusion, muscle weakness, and inflammation of the brain, which you mentioned. I want you to talk a little bit about that, if you can, about climate change. When you say climate change, what are we seeing different here in our state, or maybe even across the country, that impacts these type of numbers, this type of virus that we're speaking about today?
Well, certainly in our part of the country, and I think this is probably throughout the entire United States, and one can even say worldwide, is that we have had great fluctuations in the climate. Our winters can be extremely cold, our summers can be extremely warm, and overall there is a trend for global warming. Though I tend to call it global climate change because it's the volatility that is most concerning to me. And when we are seeing hotter weather, especially wetter weather, which we've seen both of this summer in Chicago, that's the typical conditions for mosquitoes to breed and multiply and thus spread West Nile virus as well as other mosquito-borne diseases.
I know they're spraying, in the county and different parts of our state, even Northwest Indiana. Is that enough? It sounds like that's not enough because you still have people that will have standing water on their properties.
It's still not enough. The mosquitoes spraying, what we try to do is that there's a couple of different kinds of spraying. What we try to do is in the beginnings of the summer is lay out a larvicide, which means that it kills the larvae that then will hatch into mosquitoes. And then there can be a certain amount of spraying and repellent mist done of trees, for example, that are done to prevent such large populations of mosquitoes spreading in your community. But there's going to be mosquitoes anyway. And so we need, even though I think it's important to look at environmental controls, that's what we really need to do, is to do the right things so that our environments are safe. And it doesn't necessarily mean using pesticides all the time, but we need to be doing the things that make our environment safer by focusing on climate change and mitigating the effects of global warming, such as things that could take, a full lecture. But in terms of what our responsibility is as individuals, we have to take some responsibility as individuals as well by paying attention to the 3 R's. So that's using insect repellent, replacing and repairing screens, and removing the standing water around your homes.
Perfect. Dr. Rubin, any final words before we let you go? You've been a wealth of knowledge. Any final words there?
Enjoy the outdoors, but be safe. Wear long sleeves, long socks, insect repellent, and please enjoy the last days that we have of summer, but do it in a safe way.
Dr. Rubin, you have, again, been a wealth of knowledge. I know we're talking about something that is very serious in our community, but you broke it down so everyone can understand. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Again, Dr. Rubin was talking about in Cook County. It has been confirmed the first human West Nile virus related death in suburban Cook County in Illinois this year. This is the first case a suburban Cook County resident whose age is in the 60s has died, and testing confirmed that West Nile virus was a contributing factor to this person's death. So again, check any standing water around your property. Make sure that you wear those long sleeves if possible, and make sure you wear repellent that has DEET. That is what I took away from listening to Dr. Rubin. Okay, so we're going to be talking to a professor coming up specifically about touch DNA, which is a very interesting form of technology used to really get down to finite DNA. And we know this technology was used to really pinpoint the alleged killer of Charlie Kirk. We'll have that for you right after this break. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to Chicago Live. So if you've been following the death and the killing of Charlie Kirk, you no doubt have heard about this DNA that was found on a towel, because that is what the weapon that was allegedly used was wrapped in, and that DNA tied to the alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, and all of this. And really that got us thinking here at Fox 32 about touch DNA and what it really means. And we have someone here that can definitely talk about it. This is Professor Wendy Gruhl. She is an advanced lecturer at Loyola University in the forensic science program. What's really interesting about her background, and I'll let her speak more to this, she spent 13 years with the Illinois State Police in the biology DNA section. Professor Gruhl, thank you for being with us.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Let's talk about your background and really DNA. And it sounds like you had your hand in really developing or being a part of this robust technology. Can you speak about it?
Yeah. So when we talk about touch DNA, it's just a term that broadly means that the DNA came from your hand or some part of your body coming in contact with an item. So this is following something that is really fundamental to forensic science, which is something we call Locard's transfer principle. And it really just means that when two things come in contact, they each leave a little bit on the other. And if you've ever had to sort of try to shimmy by your partner's garbage can as you pull out of the alley, maybe you make a little contact and there's a little scuff on each of those things, that's the same idea. But here, what we're looking at is when you pick up your cell phone, when you drive your car, what have you, you leave a little bit of your DNA behind on that item. And so that's what touch DNA really means in the most basic sense.
So let me ask you this, because the first thing I think of when you talk about hands and touching things, I think of a fingerprint. Are we talking about like the secretions in your fingers? Are we talking like sweat? I mean, when you say DNA, what type of DNA exactly are we talking about?
This is such a good question because it's actually, that's what most people think of. You're exactly right. So people think I touched a thing, I left a fingerprint on it. But on your hands, you have cells that are the outside of your skin. And those typically, as they dry out and develop into different sites, they lose their nucleus. And the nucleus is what contains the DNA that we're interested in. But you're also going to be constantly touching other things, right? You're going to touch your hands together. You might scratch your arm. You might be touching your face, etc. And all of that is going to have cells, and in those cells can have DNA. And so it doesn't have to be something like a body fluid. I think, when we hear DNA, we think, oh, it's blood, it's something obvious, but it can just be from cells. And even as some of those cells develop and dissolve and mature into their eventual layers of skin, they can be fragmented, so we can see pieces of the cells and pieces of the DNA.
So are you essentially saying, like, right now, like my fingertips, when I look at them, I just see, basic fingertips. I don't see any shedding, but essentially it sounds like what you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like layers of your skin are kind of left behind. And maybe you don't see it, but under a microscope, it would be visible and it would be there.
Right. So the level we're looking at is microscopic. It's so small that you can't just see it when you look at your own hands. But it's actually sub-microscope level. So on a microscope, depending on the quality of the microscope you're looking at or the magnification level, you might be able to see cells. But inside the cells are all these different organelles. And inside one of those organelles called the nucleus is where the DNA lives. And the DNA is like really, really small and compacted to get in there. So we're looking at a super, super small scale that is visually impossible, which is sometimes what makes it difficult for people to understand. There is, in fact, DNA there. But because we can't see it, we think, oh, we just don't even think about it, really.
Let's talk about where was this technology developed, and really where does this technology exist now? Are there certain places in the U.S. where if something happens and you want to know, who's behind it or try to get a DNA or a suspect profile, you have to send this said touch DNA there?
So it's really interesting when you put it that way. We actually use the same type of analysis no matter what kind of sample it is. So we could have touch DNA, we could have blood, we could have saliva from a bottle or a can or something like that. And it all gets processed in the DNA lab, in the forensic DNA lab, the same way. So it's all going to have these 4 basic steps of, once we have the sample, whatever it is, the blood, semen, saliva, touch DNA, we're going to do these 4 basic steps in the lab that involves isolating the DNA, so getting it out of the cell. We're going to measure how much DNA is present, so that's called quantitation. And then we use a process called PCR, and that just makes copies of the locations we're interested in. And PCR is done basically in every biology lab ever. But we're looking at very specific locations on the DNA when we look at it in a forensic context. And then the last step is to look at, to run it on an instrument that separates those fragments by size. And so that step is going to give us a printout of what we call the DNA profile. And then the analyst is going to either manually or with the assistance of some computer aids determine the information on that profile. So is it a mixture of profiles? Is it 2 people? Is it 3 people? Is it 1 person? Is it male? Is it female? And so all forensic labs do this same type of, we call it STR analysis. So STR is just the shorthand name for those specific locations that we look at. And it's, this was first reported actually in 1997 in Nature, the magazine, and that was the first description of using this analysis on touch DNA. So it was called something different at first, but that was the first time it's been used. So when I first started at the Illinois State Police back in the mid to late 2000s, so like 2007 or 8, you know, we were getting these types of samples already. So things like if, you know, your car is stolen, for example, they might swab the steering wheel for the person who touched or handled or drove your car. You know, things like tools. Did someone leave a pry bar where they tried to open a door or break into something? So it's been around. It's just not really known in the public, but it is a common analysis or a common evidence type in forensic casework.
Okay, so I'm one of those people that I love crime shows, right? So I'm like totally locked in on what you're saying. So after isolating, measuring, PCR, and then separating, you get the DNA profile. I followed you there. How long does this take to gather all this information?
So the question is, it depends. Or the answer is, it depends. And it depends on, so labs are going to have very similar practices depending on the manufacturer of the stuff they're using and their exact protocols, but it's going to depend. It can be as short as that process taking 1 day. It could be longer depending on a number of variables, exactly the lab's protocols, when something comes in. You know, some of the steps we set up and run the instrument, so that might be an overnight step if you got it kind of midday or something like that. And it can take longer if your protocols require that. So some steps might have, you know, a certain lab might have a 2-hour incubation and another lab might have an overnight incubation. So it can depend, but I would say probably on the short end, you're looking at a business day, and more on the longer end, could be a couple of days. But again, that's just the lab work. So you still have to get the evidence into the lab, and then you have to have someone analyze that DNA profile. And then we always, in forensic DNA, the evidence is always going to be, or the case is always going to be reviewed by a peer. So someone else who didn't work the case that has the appropriate training and technology experience to verify that everything was done correctly. So forensic, we love our peer review. So all of that would happen before, typically before anything would be released to the agency on their investigation.
I'm looking at your background. I'm looking how long you've been involved in this. And oftentimes when we talk to people, especially that are in a technology space like you are, in terms of looking at DNA and profiles, et cetera, the question always comes up, at least as of late, how does AI play into this? Has there been any talk of the technology changing based on AI and how DNA is reviewed?
You know, that's a great question. It's not something that's come up in any of my conversations. It could, but I think we right now are primarily, you know, we still have the person who is ultimately responsible for it. So you have an analyst who is going to be doing that. Now, we do have some computer aided systems in terms of that interpretation of the profiles that I mentioned, but that, it depends a little bit on what your definition of AI is. So is it like generative AI where you can put something into ChatGPT or Claude and it like gives you an answer? My experience at this point is that those aren't really developed for what we need, but that's not to say that that couldn't be a future area of research and potentially be incorporated into casework at some point.
Well, we appreciate you coming on and talking about touch DNA. I think most people find it absolutely fascinating. And most people, I would say, including myself, don't know enough about it to really delve into it and explain it like you did. Professor Gruhl, we appreciate you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, it was a pleasure. We'll stay with Chicago Live. We have much more coming up right on the other side of this break. We'll see you then. Welcome back to Chicago Live. We want to bring it back local and talk about something that I think really startled the community when they found out about it. I actually got a phone call about it, called it into the newsroom that a child, a little girl, an infant, was pulled out of Lake Michigan over the weekend. Then after that, it was an adult woman, 31 years old, and then a little boy that was 6 years old. And I know we don't, at least right now, we didn't know the names of these individuals, but you've had a chance to talk to the aunt of the 31-year-old. Give us their names and kind of like the story of what the aunt has told you.
Yeah, I think a part of our job, one, is first to report what happened, but then to humanize the people who were involved so that, these were family members of people. They were members of our community just like anyone else. So the 31-year-old woman's name is Drake Patton. Her son, 6 years old, Wyatt Patton, and then also her daughter, Dream.
I love that name.
I love the name, and in fact, Dream was a bonus child that she wasn't expecting, and Dream was born on Wyatt's birthday.
Oh,
so
awesome.
a true dream come true. Yeah, absolutely. And there was a shock factor to what took place. Someone being on the beach and finding a baby. That is horrific.
Yeah, not knowing the circumstances, right?
Exactly, and would affect anyone's life. But then to compound that matter with finding out that there was a woman and another child, and then it was all connected. We know as of right now that it was all connected. So in speaking with their aunt, there's a lot that we'll dig into a little bit later on today in terms of a traumatic experience that this young woman went through in her life that may have connected her to the water.
Okay.
Okay. And there is also in that experience a reason why, as a lot of people, you hear, okay, well, a woman and her children, and I think the initial verbiage was a domestic dispute,
yeah.
and then it turned into a domestic incident, and so you think, oh, did something happen to
Right.
them? Did someone put their bodies in the
Right.
water? How did they end up in the water? A lot of questions that people have been asking that the aunt was able to clarify for me in terms of what they've been told thus far from the police, and in talking with both sides of the family, no foul play is expected. Okay. No foul play is suspected. They do not expect that to change, all right? So you go from thinking something horrible happened to them, and still it's something
It's
horrible
horrible.
happened to
Right.
them, to then thinking, okay, we've got a totally different ball game that we're playing with here. You're going from, was this a homicide, to no, this is what is called familicide. And that brings up a totally different conversation where a woman made the decision to not only take her life, but to take that of her children as well. And in the conversation with the aunt, you'll also understand a little bit more of possibly why she made the decision to bring her children with her.
The mindset,
There
the
is a
mindset.
lot to that, and that's not to say that we will fully understand.
Right. We may not.
Obviously, with a situation like suicide or familicide, trying to rationalize an irrational decision is very difficult, and really you can't. But these are the facts that we know thus far from the aunt. The family obviously going through a whole lot over these last few days. Planning a funeral for one person
Yeah, I know.
is difficult.
3.
Planning 3 is just astronomical, but they are finding a way to do it all together. And if you just think of the fact that there are 2 sides of this family, that's a lot of emotion to get through, because there's a lot of people who will also think, well, why didn't she leave the children with me? Why didn't she leave the children with you? Why did this have to come to this?
A lot of whys.
A lot of whys. But one thing that you'll understand too is that with suicide, with grief, woulda, coulda, shouldas can take you down a long, dark path.
Yeah.
This young woman was already on a path, and no one really saw it. There were people who saw her that morning.
And didn't think anything
Didn't
was wrong.
think anything of it, and so it was a shock to them, just like it was a shock to the people who were on that beach, on opposite ends of that beach, who discovered those bodies. And there's a lot of emotion that so many people are grappling with right now, be it those who were out there that day. Those are things I would never be able to get over as a person, but then also
see,
with the family, just thinking through, did we miss something? What could we have done? The aunt wanted to make sure that in any segment where we're talking about this, we make sure to get the suicide hotline number out there, which is 988. There's so many people who are in dark places.
And we don't think about it, and they don't show it, but they are.
Absolutely. You may mask it in
That's
many
right.
different ways. You may go about your life kind of, people may see you in a happy-go-lucky type of environment, and in thinking that like, oh, this person is doing just well, they're doing great things, but they may be masking it in a way that you just don't see, and holding on to some very deep, dark hurts that may come out in many different ways. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about something so serious that we get that hotline number out there, which is 988, if you are in any type of situation where you find yourself feeling overwhelmed.
Right.
One of the things we talked about was a permanent decision for a temporary problem. We may not
Interesting.
in that moment think that we'll get through whatever
But
it
you
is
can.
we're going
Right,
through,
but
but
you
there is
can.
a brighter day.
So you're going to have this story at 4 o'clock on our
Correct.
newscast, and at 5 o'clock, and on our website, fox32chicago.com, and Fox Local. Anita, thank you so much. I'm happy
Absolutely.
you got a chance to talk to that family, because so many people, like you said, are going through this, and people aren't always talking about it. We do want to go to this now. This is a live press conference that is underway. We know that Chair Jerome Powell is at the mic right now. We're expecting him to talk about rates going down, and the market's already reacting to this in a positive way. Let's take a listen.
Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. The median projection in the SEP for total PCE inflation is 3.0% this year and falls to 2.6% in 2026 and to 2.1% in 2027. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. At today's meeting, the committee decided to lower the target range for the federal funds rate by a quarter percentage point to 4 to 4.25%, and to continue reducing the size of our balance sheet. Changes to government policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. Higher tariffs have begun to push up prices in some categories of goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived, a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed. Our obligation is to ensure that a one-time increase in the price level does not become an ongoing inflation problem. In the near term, risks to inflation are tilted to the upside and risks to employment to the downside, a challenging situation. When our goals are in tension like this, our framework calls for us to balance both sides of our dual mandate. With downside risks to employment having increased, the balance of risks has shifted. Accordingly, we judged it appropriate at this meeting to take another step toward a more neutral policy stance. With today's decision, we remain well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate, based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario for the economy. The median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 3.6% at the end of this year, 3.4% at the end of 2026, and 3.1% at the end of 2027. This path is 1/4 percentage point lower than projected in June. As is always the case, these individual forecasts are subject to uncertainty, and they're not a committee plan or decision. Policy is not on a preset course. The Fed has been assigned two goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission, and we at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to our discussion.
Great. Thank you. Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. As you know, Fed Governor Stephen Miron has continued, kept his position at the White House, even as he's joined the Fed board. This is the first time, I believe, the Fed's board has had someone with executive branch ties in decades. Does this compromise the Fed's independence from day-to-day politics? And relatedly, how can you maintain the public's perception the Fed is politically independent with this dynamic? Thank you.
So we did welcome a new committee member today, as we always do, and the committee remains united in pursuing our dual mandate goals. We're strongly committed to maintaining our independence, and beyond that, I really don't have anything to share.
Well, and then just as a quick follow-up, I'm sorry, can you and other Fed officials have spoken extensively about the impact of tariffs on inflation, although perhaps with many companies appearing to eat the tariffs, tariffs may be impacting the labor market and other parts of the economy instead. Do you see that as a possible outcome here, that tariffs are the reason we're seeing some slowing, particularly in the labor market, rather than in inflation? Thank you.
You know, it's certainly possible. You know, we're beginning to see, we have begun to see goods prices showing through into higher inflation, and actually the increase in goods prices accounts for most of the increase in inflation, or perhaps all of the increase in inflation over the course of this year. Those are not very large effects at this point, and we do expect them to continue to build over the course of the rest of the year and into next year. And you know, it's also possible that there may be effects on employment, but that I would say if you're looking at why employment is doing what it's doing, that's much more about the change in immigration. So the supply of workers has obviously come way down. There's very little growth, if any, in the supply of workers. And at the same time, demand for workers has also come down quite sharply, and to the point where we see what I've called a curious balance. It's, typically when we say things are in balance, that sounds good, but in this case, the balance is because both supply and demand have come down quite sharply. Now demand coming down a little more sharply because we now see the unemployment rate edging up.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, do economic conditions and the balance of risks no longer warrant a restrictive policy setting?
So I don't think we can say that. What we can say is this, that over the course of this year, we've kept our policy at a restrictive level, and people have different views, but a clearly restrictive level, I would say. So, and we were able to do that over the course of this year because the labor market was in very solid condition with strong job creation and all those things. I think if you go back to April and now look at the revised job creation numbers for May, June, July, and August, I can no longer say that. So what that means is that the risks were clearly tilted toward inflation. I would say they're moving toward equality. Maybe they're not quite out of equality. We don't need to know that. But we do know that they've moved meaningfully toward greater equality, the risks between the two goals, and that suggests that we should be moving in the direction of neutral, and that's what we did today.
Under what circumstances would a larger than 25 basis points rate cut be warranted, and how seriously was that option entertained at your meeting this week?
There wasn't widespread support at all for a 50 basis point cut today. I think we've done very large rate hikes and very large rate cuts in the last 5 years, and you tend to do those at a time when you feel that policy is out of place and needs to move quickly to a new place. That's not at all what I feel certainly now. I feel like our policy has been doing the right thing so far this year. I think we were right to wait and see how tariffs and inflation and the labor market evolved. I think we're now reacting to the much lower level of job creation and other evidence of softening in the labor market and saying, well, those risks are maybe not fully balanced, but moving in the direction of balance now. And so that warrants a change in policy.
Colby Smith with the New York Times. Should we be viewing today's cut as the committee taking out some insurance against the possibility that the labor market is at risk of weakening? Or is it the committee's view that the dynamics of a downturn are already in place? I guess I'm just trying to square the shift in the rate forecast in the SEP towards more cuts than just 3 months ago with the fact that the forecast for unemployment didn't change.
Yeah, I think you could think of this in a way as a risk management cut, because if you look at the SEP, actually the projections for growth this year and next actually ticked up just a little bit, and inflation and unemployment didn't really move much. So what's different now? What's different now is that you see a very different picture of the risks to the labor market. You've seen, we were looking at 150,000 jobs a month at the time of the last meeting, and now we see the revisions and we see the new numbers. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on payroll job creation, but it's just one of the things that suggests that the labor market is really cooling off, and that tells you that it's time to take that into account in our in our policy.
So just looking at the SEP once again, the median participant has inflation higher than previously expected by the end of next year, and the Fed not getting back to the 2% target until 2028. So I guess I'm just wondering how you characterize the risk to price pressures of kicking off a series of cuts at this point.
Yeah, so I would look at it this way. We fully understand and appreciate that we need to remain fully committed to restoring 2% inflation on a sustained basis, and we will do that. At the same time, we've got to weigh the risks to the two goals. And I would say since April, to me, the risks of higher and more persistent inflation have probably become a little less. And that's partly because the labor market has softened, GDP growth has slowed. So I would just say that the risks there have been less than one might think. And in terms of the labor market, what we're seeing is unemployment is still low. It's still a relatively low rate, but we're seeing downside risks.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Radio and Television. I'm
a little confused by your explanation of the Fed cutting rates because of unemployment. If you think that most of what's happening in the employment area is related to immigration, which your rate cuts wouldn't address, how do you see that as more important than inflation, which has remained almost a full percentage point above your target?
Well, I was saying that what's happening in the labor market has more to do with immigration than it has to do with tariffs. That was the question I was answering. So I wouldn't say that all of what's happening in the labor market is due to tariffs. I mean, you clearly have a slowing in it due to immigration. You clearly have a slowing in demand, which is now perhaps more than that in supply, and we know that because the unemployment rate has ticked up. So, that's what I meant by that.
I think a follow-up. Every year since 2015, the SEP has forecast that you would hit your target 2 years later. And this year, this SEP says you're going to hit your target 2 years later. 2% does not seem to be in sight. Does that suggest that the 2% target is not really achievable? And does this present any credibility problems for you in telling people that that's what you're going to do if you can never reach it?
Well, I mean, you're right. It does say we're going to get to 2% inflation.
Listening right there to the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell do some Q&A with the media. What we've learned from this press conference is kind of what I think what we were all expecting. The Fed approves a quarter-point interest rate cut and sees 2 more coming this year. And we know what that has meant for the market. The Dow has added 150 points, but S&P 500 has pulled back as the Fed delivered that widely expected rate cut. So, of course, we will continue to follow that on our website, fox32chicago.com, and also here on Fox Local as well. We want to bring in our guest who is standing by right now. We want to go to break, actually, but we're going to bring in our guest who's standing by. And this is all about a report about bad airports. And it is a little, I think, unexpected for a lot of people that O'Hare and also Midway would make this list, considering all of the improvements. We're going to talk to Michael Taylor right after this break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Chicago Live. The 2025 North America Airport Satisfaction Study from J.D. Power was released. And here to talk about it is Michael Taylor, Managing Director of Travel, Hospitality, and Retail over at J.D. Power. Thank you so much for being with us. Let me make sure I can hear you there. What did you say? I'm sorry. Say that one more time for me.
You're quite welcome.
There you go. Yep, I can hear you. Thank you for your time. So yeah, let's talk about this. In terms of airports, how are airports kind of graded on this survey? And then where does Chicago stand in all of this?
Well, we look at all aspects, or what we call dimensions of the airport experience, getting to the airport, what's like to get through TSA, how clean is the bathroom, how comfortable is the gate, things like that. What's the food, beverage, and retail like? And those are basically dimensions that we do. We ask about 30,000 travelers who have traveled to an airport recently in North America. And that's the basics of the study.
Now, let's bring it on back home. So we've seen major upgrades to our terminals here in Chicago and beyond. How much does that impact the score?
Well, the scores for O'Hare and for Midway both went up this year. It just turns out that a lot of other airports improved as well. There's still a lot to do, obviously, at O'Hare. O'Hare's terminal facilities are probably its biggest drawback. The biggest drawback at Midway is it's pretty crowded down there. It's a relatively small airport for the number of passengers that are going through it.
In terms of like security lines and crowding, those are always on top of mind for travelers. How are different sized airports handling that? And did you see a difference in the rankings based on how airports handle that?
Yeah, that's why we have three different categories. We have medium, large, and mega. So Midway is in the large, and obviously O'Hare is in the mega category. And really, there is a big difference in TSA wait times and any kind of wait times, how far away you park, how many people are in the terminal, those kinds of things. So it's very different. That's why we have three different awards categories, because a small airport like Indianapolis or Palm Beach International is very different from an airport like O'Hare. And you're right. One of the biggest issues that we see in airport and airline travel is you've got a deadline. This is one of the few deadlines you have in your life. If you're late for your flight, you've got a lot of problems. If you're late for your hotel room or your rental car, it's no big deal. They just toss you another set of keys. But if you're late for your airline flight at an airport, you've got issues. And that makes people very nervous about how long they have to wait for anything.
That's a good point. And there are some airports, you're right, that, when I think about it, places that I've traveled outside of Chicago and even O'Hare and places like Midway, there are some airports where I don't mind getting there early because they have amenities there that kind of make me want to, chill out and stay. What does that mean for the future, you think, of airport investments when you look at airports that are creating kind of like this experience, not just a place where people are flying in and out, but kind of like creating an experience where you don't mind getting there early for breakfast or a cocktail?
Well, that has been the biggest trend in the last 25 years, is actually the upgrade of food, beverage, and retail, and things for people to actually spend money on. And we see in our data, there's a real high correlation between how people think about the airport, how they feel about their satisfaction with the airport, and how much money they spend. And believe it or not, the more money they spend, the happier they are. But the underlying factors there is that you have to have something for them to spend their money on. It's got to be high quality. And usually it's got to be some kind of local food, beverage, or some kind of item they can't find in their home area to make the experience really unique for them. And that's been a big driving factor in improving experience at airports in the last 25 years.
Yeah, you have a good point there. Different restaurants that perhaps you can only get in this particular airport or in this particular state. Maybe you didn't get a chance to go and get the beignets, right? But you can get them at the airport now. So I get exactly what you're saying there. You mentioned that other airports, they were boosted up in the rankings, and that really dragged down our airports here in Chicago. Can you talk about what some of those other airports, where are they, and really what's the difference there? What happened there differently that boosted their scores?
Well, the top performing airports, as I always say, you have to, a good airport does all the blocking and tackling really well. It's easy to get to. TSA doesn't take too long. The bathroom is clean. The concourse is clean, and then you got a place to sit and it's comfortable. That's a good airport if you do those things well. A great airport does all those things well, plus has a great food, beverage, and retail experience. And that's generally highly correlated with the people who win the J.D. Power study. So this year, Minneapolis-St. Paul was number one in food, beverage, and retail in the mega category. They were the winner. They were the winner last year as well, by the way. And in the medium category, Indianapolis, I think a 7 or 8 time winner now, also improved their food, beverage, and retail, and they're number one in their category. And the only exception to the rule, and really has been an exception only a couple times in the last 10 years, is that Santa Ana or John Wayne Airport out in Southern California didn't win the food, beverage, and retail category, but they do everything else really, really well. And so they managed to overcome that. But there's a high correlation between people liking the food, beverage, and retail at airports and those being a winner in the J.D. Power study.
Yeah, I'm looking at this right now about Minneapolis St. Paul International ranks highest in passenger satisfaction among mega airports for a second consecutive year with a score of 660. And then there's Detroit, and then there's also Phoenix Sky Harbor International, which I've gone through that one. I've enjoyed Detroit, not so much. I disagree with the people on those ratings. But let me ask you this: what does Minneapolis St. Paul have? That maybe, people are watching right now. I've never had the privilege of flying through there. What do they have there?
Oh, well, first off, it's a relatively easy airport to access. They have a great relationship with the Department of Transportation in the state of Minnesota. So they have great signs and directions to the airport. Believe it or not, that's a very fundamental thing. A lot of airports don't do that very well. And once you get to the airport, they have a mall, and they call it a mall. It looks exactly like any other mall you'd find in Minneapolis. Maybe not as big as the Mall of America, but it's it's very nice. And you find a lot of Minnesota items there and a lot of high quality dining choices that you can make. And that's really what makes them number one.
Yeah, that does make a difference. I agree with you on that. Really, that restaurant kind of hospitality experience. Let me ask you this. What are the top 3 complaints that most travelers have about airports?
The top 3, sorry, what?
Complaints.
Oh, complaints. It's generally the biggest complaints are going to be, the state of the bathroom. That's really the biggest complaint. That's probably the most predictive question that we have in the survey. We could almost rank airports by how people feel about their bathroom experience at the airport and how well the airport does in the final ranking. That's usually the number one thing is the bathroom was dirty or something was broken, those kinds of things. Second biggest one is just access. There was a traffic jam on the way to the airport, and stressed me out. And it stresses out everything else. Once you're late getting into the airport, almost the rest of the experiences also go down no matter what the airport is doing because you're so stressed out you feel like you can't take advantage of anything the airport is actually offering.
Yeah, I would argue that probably dragged down our airports because when you talk about traffic around here, especially if you're going to O'Hare and around Midway as of late, there has definitely been a fair share of traffic because of construction, which, that's always up for debate, the times in which we have construction. Any indication of what airports that ranked really low, in your opinion, what they could do differently for people to have a better, review of those experiences?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest drag on satisfaction for some of the bigger airports is the fact that it takes so long to improve them. And what we tell our clients is that improvement begins with a B, as in $1 billion. So you need to spend at least $1 billion, no matter where you are, actually, no matter what size airport you are, to really see an effect on satisfaction for the terminal facilities itself. So that's probably the key thing that we see that keeps some of these airports down. I mean, it took forever to get O'Hare's plan approved. It's taking forever to get Philadelphia Airport's plans approved. It took forever to do LaGuardia. So it's just a sheer delay that it takes. And then once it gets going, it takes sometimes 5 to 10 years to complete a project. For example, Atlanta Airport, Hartsfield, has a 32-year plan for planned construction. They plan their construction 1/3 of a century in the future.
Yeah.
So it's an awful, really complicated process to improve the airport.
Yeah, I'll be an old lady in 32 years. I'll still be here. But yeah, good point there.
I don't think I'll see that 32-year improvement myself. I don't think I'm going to last that long.
Let me ask, I think you'll last. Let me ask you this. When you look at how U.S. airports are compared on an international level, how do they compare? What are some of the best on the international side? And is that something that J.D. Power looks at?
Yeah, that's something we've looked at in the past. This is a ranking North American airports, not international airports, but we have looked at international airports in the past, and probably those same characters come up. Singapore, Dubai. Singapore is a fantastic facility. They have all sorts of really bizarre things you wouldn't expect at an airport, like 3-story water fountains.
Water fountain, yes. That's gone
mazes.
viral. Yes.
Who would put a maze in an airport? But they do it. So it's very surprising, very interesting airports in Singapore.
Let me ask you this. In the world of social media, which we are in, and you see, some of these airports, like you mentioned the waterfall. I've never been at that airport, but I knew about it because of the TikTok people and people on Instagram, the influencers blowing it up. How do you think persuasive can some of these influencers be in really how people view some of these places?
Well, it's not so much for the airports themselves. I don't think that impacts it very much because things like the state of the bathroom are far more important than what some social media influencer thinks about. What really has made a difference is destination travel for social media influencers. Thailand is paying for people to travel to Thailand for free if they'll go somewhere outside of Bangkok to film themselves and put it on Instagram and YouTube and things like that, just to promote the tourism within the industry or within the country itself. I think that's a fantastic idea. But that's probably where the social media and influencers, online influencers, have the most impact is choice of destination, not necessarily the airport.
Good point. And I think you're right. When I remember seeing the fountain there, it was someone just, going there to visit, posted the fountain. It just so happens that the fountain inside the airport blew up on social media. And I think because that's something that, if you've traveled, domestically, that is not something that you're used to seeing. I mean, if you could name an airport that has something rare inside that maybe people aren't used to seeing, what airport comes to mind on U.S. soil?
Well, I think Sacramento has some really interesting, artwork that's a part of the airport itself. They have a gigantic red rabbit that's hanging over the escalator. And I mean, this rabbit's like 30 or 40 feet long, and it's diving into a marble suitcase at the bottom of the airport. And so they have a lot of really kind of strange things like that. So within the United States, that's one that sticks out to me is the artwork installation at Sacramento Airport. It's really part of the airport and very, very unusual.
No, you're right. And I lived in Sacramento, and it's I want to say it's when you first arrive and you come down, it's like massive. It's like right there. You can't help but see it. It is something to see. And speaking of water fountains, it's more of a water show from what I remember when I was traveling with my daughter. LaGuardia Airport has like the water fountain kind of like show.
Yeah, dancing water.
Yeah, it's really, which is really impressive. So I think the U.S. is slowly but surely getting on board with some of these things that we're seeing on international soil. Mr. Taylor, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for some of your time today.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about travel. Now I want to go somewhere. I got to think of where I want to go. All right, Mr. Taylor, thank you. And thank you guys so much for watching the first hour of Chicago Live. We're going to move into the second hour of Chicago Live. And coming up next, you'll have Brian Jackson hosting that part of the show. We'll be right back. You're right. I forgot about that.
All right, time is out 2:04. I'm Brian Jackson. Thanks so much for joining us here on Chicago Live. First, this 2 o'clock hour, we're going to head to Capitol Hill, where Kash Patel and other members of the FBI have been getting grilled by the House Judiciary Committee for some of the responses to different investigations that have been taking place all over the country. Let's listen in.
Mr. Liu votes no. Ms. Jayapal. Ms. Jayapal votes no. Mr. Correa. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse. Ms. McBath. Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Ballant. Ms. Ballant votes no. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes no. Ms. Kamlager-Dove. Ms. Kamlager-Dove votes no. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman votes no. Ms. Crockett.
No.
Ms. Crockett votes no.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Tiffany votes aye.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 21 ayes and 16 noes.
Motion to table is successful. That concludes today's.
Nope, I've got one.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll tell y'all when I'm done reading. Mr. Chair, pursuant to Clause 2K6 of Rule 11, I move that the committee subpoena the head of the Bureau of Prisons, William K. Marshall, to discuss and produce all records relating to the transfer of Jeffrey Epstein, co-conspirator and child sex trafficker, Ghislaine Maxwell, in apparent violation of BOP policies regarding sex offenders, to include all BOP communications with DOJ, FBI, and the White House. BOP transferred Maxwell to a minimum security camp following her interview with President Trump's former personal attorney and now Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche.
Motion to
I am
table
done reading
is not
now.
debatable. This question occurs on the motion to table. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes yes. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye.
And you were just listening to some information coming from Capitol Hill, where they were grilling some of the FBI regarding some of their investigations. And you heard Representative Jasmine Crockett calling for the release of the Epstein files there at the tail end of that. Now we're also going to head back to Washington as well, where the U.S. Federal Reserve has just decided to cut interest rates by 0.25%. Let's listen in to the chair there, Jerome Powell.
Claire Jones, Financial Times. Given the range of views expressed prior to the meeting, I think there was a lot less dissent today than a lot of people expected. It'd be good to know just what you think the drivers were of coming to that very strong consensus in the meeting, and also on the flip side to just explain why the dot plots are really so scattered between, someone even expecting rates to end up higher by the end of the year to 5 cuts. I mean, what were the kind of range of views you had about, on one side, why there was so much support for a cut today, and on the flip side, why there's so much divergence about what comes next?
So I think there's quite a wide assessment that the situation has changed with respect to the labor market. Whereas we could still say, and did say in July, at the time of the July meeting, that the labor market was in solid condition, and we could point to 150,000 jobs per month and many other things. I think that the new data that we've had, and it's not just payrolls, it's other things as well, suggests that there really is meaningful downside risk. I said there was downside risk then, but I think that downside risk is now a reality, and there's clearly more downside risk. So I think that's broadly accepted. And so that meant different things for different people. Some wrote down, almost everyone wrote down, supported this cut, and some supported more cuts and some didn't. as you will see from the dot plot. So that's just the way it is. I mean, people have, you have people who take this work very seriously, think about it all the time, do their work, discuss it with our colleagues. You know, we endlessly discuss this.
And you were just listening to the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, there after the Fed just made a decision to cut interest rates by 0.25%. Fed is expecting potentially 2 more rate cuts before the end of the year. Coming up after a short break, we're going to check in with one of our colleagues from WITI in Milwaukee on a case of children being found in a place where you would last think that would happen. That's next on Chicago Live. Welcome back to Chicago Live on this Wednesday afternoon. Time is now 2:12. I'm Brian Jackson here with you. Our next story is a very disturbing one. We're going to be walked through how police first discovered some children were locked inside of a storage unit. This happened up in Milwaukee, and we're going to be joined now by Fox 6 News reporter Christina Van Zels, who's going to provide a little bit more information on that. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, this was a very disturbing finding from police that we found about yesterday. And to give your viewers some background as to where this happened, this is about 10 minutes north of the downtown Milwaukee area. And Milwaukee police found 6 kids, the youngest being a 2-month-old baby, locked inside a storage unit. This is a location called Store Safe, where people have rent out spaces and lockers. The good news here, though, is all of those children are reported to not have any injuries. One thing we are waiting for today and hopefully this week is to see if any formal charges will be filed. We do know that a 33-year-old man and a 26-year-old woman were arrested at that site yesterday. So we're still waiting to see if those formal charges do come down. But the big good news here is all of those children did not have any reported injuries in this case. But again, 6 kids found, the youngest a 2-month-old. The other children were 2, 5, 7, and 9. So just a disturbing situation here. And of course, we are still waiting to learn more from prosecutors if they do file any charges and why those kids were there in the first place.
That was actually going to be my next question for you, Christina. Do we have any idea how long the kids had been there or what eventually led authorities to find them at this storage unit?
Yeah, so police got a report at about 1:30 in the morning yesterday. We're not sure who reported this, but I did want to tell you one interesting thing that we found out when we were out there yesterday at that site was a neighbor mentioned actually seeing kids that matched this age riding their bikes in that storage lot, parking lot, and she told us that something just felt off about it. So she said that happened about a week ago. It's not clear at this time how long those kids were there or what the conditions of that storage unit were where they were found. But again, that's something we are working to get answered. We did see a Milwaukee County homeless outreach truck there yesterday as well. They told us, in fact, they were responding to this situation, but couldn't tell us more due to privacy concerns. But that one woman neighbor did tell us that she had seen kids in the area that matched those ages riding their bikes in that parking lot. So it's not clear at this time, but definitely something we are continuing to ask.
Christina, do we have any idea what has happened to those kids in the meantime while this investigation continues to play out? Are they with relatives? Have they been taken into protective services? What's the status on the kids currently?
That is the big question I think a lot of people in Milwaukee are really wondering today is what's going to happen to these kids. We do not know at this time, but again, if formal charges are filed, that is something hopefully we can learn. Of course, want to keep the kids' privacy safe in this situation. However, one woman showed up to the scene yesterday in full tears. This really hit home for her. She was just heartbroken over the situation, doesn't have any personal connection to what happened, but just said she felt like as a community that Milwaukee had failed these children, and she wanted to do whatever she could to step in and help in any way she could. So a lot of people felt touched by this and just want to step in and do what they can. But as far as what's happening to the kids next, that's something that hopefully we'll find out in the coming days. And what their relationship was to the two people who were arrested, that's another question we're working to get answered.
And on the other side of this, have we heard anything from StoreSafe? Have they made any comments? And obviously there could be some questions raised here about the facility's responsibility or some of the security measures that they have in place there.
And that's something we were hoping to get answered as well. We went into the lobby yesterday. Of course, we were all there all day yesterday. We saw forensic trucks going in and out of that facility. So the person who was on site did not want to go on camera. They didn't want to give us a comment. They referred us to their corporate office, which we've inquired with and have not gotten a response yet. But just standing outside the facility, it's gated and there are dozens of cameras all over the building there, so you can see there's definitely security. So they did not want to comment yesterday, and it's not clear who reported these kids and how long they were there, but we are continuing to stay on them and looking for answers as to how long those children might have been in that unit space, and if that's the name of the people who were arrested, if they were renting that spot. So still a lot of unanswered questions today, but I do want to say we are talking with a family member who reached out to us about this tomorrow. So she reached out on her own will, wanting to give us more insight on what may or may not have happened. So we are planning on speaking with her tomorrow, and we'll hopefully get some of those answers there.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to bring you back on after we get that update. Christina, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, time is now 2:17. We're going to take a short break here on Chicago Live, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Chicago Live. This is a live shot across the pond in London, where our President Donald Trump, is getting some of the royal treatment as he is the first U.S. president in history to have a second state visit with the royal family. President Trump is joined by his wife, Melania Trump, as well on this visit. The two, like I said before, they have been getting some of the royal treatments. They were met by a guard of honor when they first arrived. They've been spending some time with King Charles III, where they even carried out a military inspection a little bit earlier. And as part of those festivities, President Trump also had a private lunch with the king and other members of the royal family. They're all gathering for a banquet that is happening this evening. Now, this is kind of a continuation of what has been a historic partnership between the United States and the UK. President Trump even gifted King Charles a replica of President Eisenhower's sword. And also happening in the UK, while the president is making his second state visit there, there have been some protesters that have gathered outside of Windsor Castle. I believe that is what we're looking at here on your screen here, to protest the state visit of President Trump. Some demonstrators, they were seen chanting and holding up banners expressing their anger towards President Trump visiting the UK. Also, while that is happening, tomorrow President Trump is expected to meet with the Prime Minister of the UK. They're going to continue discussions around a trade deal between the two countries. We are expecting some remarks from either the Trump administration or possibly the royal family coming up at about 2:30 our time. If that does happen, we'll bring it to you here live on Chicago Live. For now, we're going to head to the big board, where, as you can see, stocks are up about 240 points. That has been trading in the green for most of today. And we just learned a couple of hours ago that the Federal Reserve has decided to drop interest rates by a quarter percentage of a point. We're going to check back in with Jerome Powell, who is answering some questions after the Fed just made that decision a little bit earlier this afternoon. All right, looks like Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell just actually ended his remarks a few short seconds ago. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with much more to come here on Chicago Live. welcome back to Chicago Live. This is a live look across the big pond. As you can see, the UK flag waving there in the background as President Trump makes a historic trip to the UK. He is now the first president in United States history to make a second state visit the UK. He was already hosted by the late Queen Elizabeth back in the year 2019. President and First Lady Melania Trump, they attended a state banquet with the royal family that happened a little bit earlier this evening. Trump arrived at Windsor Castle on Marine One on Wednesday, and he spent the night there in central London as they were greeted with a lot of pomp and circumstance. There's also been a lot of protests about the president's trip to the UK. We'll continue to bring you more updates on that. We are expecting a possible press conference or something of that nature where either the Trump administration or the royal family on this historic visit. We've yet to hear from them, so we are expecting that possibly a little bit later on this hour here on Chicago Live. We will bring that to you if that does indeed happen within the next half an hour. But for now, we're joined by Emily Walls for a look at our forecast. Still feeling like summer. I'm still wearing t-shirts.
Yeah, I know. It is gorgeous outside, and it's going to stay that way. So essentially what we're dealing with is we have something that's called an omega block. If you've never heard of that, basically you have two upper-level low-pressure systems. The jet stream is going to dip around that low, and then you have a really strong high in the middle. Lucky for us, we are right underneath that high-pressure system. So it's going to remain this way for the next couple of days. It's going to start to break down this blocking pattern going into Friday and then this upcoming weekend. That's why we start to see some changes in the forecast. But for the most part, the next couple of days, it still looks stunning. Today is essentially a carbon copy of what we had yesterday, you know, where we're seeing temperatures in the upper 70s to low 80s at the lakefront. But then farther inland, that's where we're seeing highs, Brian, that are going up into the upper 80s, close to 90 degrees. Ooh. So it's really not feeling like mid-September at all.
No, like I was driving down, it's coming from the north side, heading back south along Lakeshore Drive, and saw so many boats still out there enjoying the last couple of days. Are we talking maybe a couple of days of this, another week? What do you think?
As far as temperatures are concerned, I think we're staying above average all the way through the rest of the month of September. We might see a couple dips here or there, but for the most part, we're going to be in really good shape. Tomorrow, notice we're about the same as today, starting off a little foggy in some locations, but otherwise it's just going to be another sunny day. Mid 80s expected. Friday we're partly cloudy. There's a very, very small chance that we could have an isolated rain shower Friday night, but most areas end up staying dry. And then over the weekend, that brief little dip in the temps is still keeping us about 5 to 7 degrees warmer than average, because average for this time of September is actually mid 70s. So we're looking really good going into this upcoming weekend as well.
I love the 70s. You mentioned this weekend, I saw a chance of rain.
Yeah.
Do you have a timeline for possible showers with the Bears game Sunday?
So on Sunday, unfortunately, the best chance of seeing some of that rain is going to be during the afternoon, the evening hours. But you'll notice it's only a 30% chance. I'll say it this way. If you get rained on Sunday, you're unlucky because at this point, I have outdoor plans for Sunday. I'm not changing them. So I think if your meteorologist isn't changing them just yet, you're
in good shape.
Yeah.
And it feels like we need that rain. I feel like we haven't had much rain throughout the month. It feels like.
We do. So over the last week and a half or so, we've had only one event really come through, and that was this past Saturday when we had some pretty heavy downpours during the morning. But otherwise, it has been dry. Surprisingly, the latest drought monitor, they come out every Thursday morning. So this past Thursday, most of the area is still not showing any drought-like conditions except a couple small patches here or there. So the northwest suburbs, places like McHenry County, Lake County, a patch over toward Ottawa and LaSalle County, seeing abnormally dry conditions. But everywhere else, it's considered to be okay. Now, when we see another drought monitor come out this Thursday, I'm expecting to see that area of abnormally dry conditions likely expanding.
All right, we'll have to check back with you tomorrow when that comes out.
Yep.
All right, thanks so much for your time.
Of course.
All right, time is now 2:31. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back here on Chicago Live. Welcome back to Chicago Live. Brian Jackson here with you. Time is now 2:35 on this Wednesday afternoon. We've been showing you some pictures of President Trump becoming the first U.S. president to make a second state visit here to the U.K. He and First Lady Melania Trump are having a dinner. And we're looking inside what we believe is where that dinner is taking place. Just look at this, I guess, cathedral-like ceilings. Looks incredible in there. They are truly rolling out the red carpet for President Donald Trump and the First Lady. Let's take a look at the festivities. All right, you were just looking inside the royal dinner happening in the UK, where President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump are there for the second state visit there by the Trump administration. President Trump is the first American president to make 2 state visits to the UK. We'll have more details on that trip a little bit later. Back here at home, we want to give you some new perspective. We're going to be bringing in Austin Happel from the Shed Aquarium, where a new study published in the Journal of Great Lakes Research shows that there are 24 new fish species that are successfully growing in the Chicago River. He's going to tell us about some of the restoration efforts in the Chicago River and what it means for the river and the city of Chicago going forward. Thanks so much for being here.
Hello, hi. Thanks for having me.
So Austin, walk us through this study. We've learned that there are 24, I guess, new species that have been introduced to the ecosystem of the Chicago River. What does that say about just how much cleaner the river is to compared to how it was maybe 5 or even 10 years ago?
Yeah, so our research was looking at fish spawning within the Chicago River, not being introduced to it per se, but actually living in it, finding each other, finding enough food to be happy, finding habitat to spawn on, and then the egg that's produced living to a larval stage where we then found it. So of what we found 24 species spawning here. There's probably more that are spawning if we used a different technique to look for them, but being able to document that there's 24 of them spawning within the downtown area of Chicago says quite a bit for how we have cleaned up our local waterways and how we have treated them. So it tells us a lot more than what finding adult fish can. Through surveys of adult fish, there's somewhere around 60, 70 adults that have been found. But that doesn't mean all of them spawn in this area and are finding, habitat to do so. So this is the first step in sort of documenting what's happening and what species are able to sort of sustain themselves within our downtown waters. So we, like you suggested, we're interested in seeing how they then respond to restoration actions that are happening. So we work closely with our partners Urban Rivers and partners Friends of the Chicago River on different restoration activities. Those involve putting native plants within the river in different areas, and we're interested in the future and following up and seeing how those may be providing benefits for fish to reproduce and fish to reproduce that we haven't documented in this study yet.
And Austin, I know we've had our friends from Friends of the Chicago River on the show a couple of times, and they're going to have people swimming in the river a little bit later on this month, I believe. I want to ask you, with this new discovery of these species of fish kind of spawning in the Chicago River, how far away are we from people actually fishing in the Chicago River on a more regular basis?
Oh, people fish in the river currently. There's a lot of people we see fishing for species like common carp or largemouth bass or different catfish. So sport fish are reproducing within the river and are pretty abundant and active, and so they're providing a fishery for folks. Now, how can we maybe provide fishing opportunities that are easier to access? So how can we then, increase the ability of people to get to the riverfront and be able to enjoy their time there? How do we increase the size of the fish that they're catching? Those are some of the questions that we're looking to answer, and part of that is bringing attention to the river. The more people that are enjoying the river, the easier it is for us to fight to conserve and protect it. And the upcoming Chicago River Swim is a great opportunity to do that. So it's bringing a lot of eyes to the river, and a lot of those eyes would probably think the river's super polluted. So to then see people swimming in it can maybe change some perspectives. And once you change perspectives, you might start to change actions and how people either recreate or help protect and conserve our local environment. So we're excited to talk about this research and how it then leads into some of these other activities and events that are happening in Chicago.
Austin, this research, it notes some differences between maybe the south and north branches of the river. What aspect does that play into what type of fish species are found in maybe the north, but not the south, or kind of vice versa there?
Yeah, that was a nuance that we saw with looking at these larval fish that we don't really see with the adult fish surveys. In our research, we were finding that there's more species that are spawning in the south branch of the Chicago River than there are in the north branch of the river. And the species that are spawning in the south branch are those that we generally associate with not being tolerant to pollution. They tend to get stressed out pretty easily and they decide not to reproduce. So seeing them reproducing down there means that the south branch is offering something that is missing in the north branch. And so now our task is to figure out what that is. Is there large areas of submerged vegetation in the south branch that's not in the north branch? Are there maybe piles of rocks? Are there off-channel areas? Areas that are maybe out of the main flows of the river, or areas that are shallower that could support maybe submerged vegetation more than in other areas. So those are questions we're now trying to define. What are the habitat aspects in the south branch that's allowing that? But it's a super cool finding to be able to then see a difference and then use that difference to learn from, because we can then inform restoration activities. So once we can kind of pinpoint what's causing that difference, we can then maybe start bringing some more informed restoration activities to the other parts of the river.
Austin, what would you say are some of the next steps as far as future studies on the Chicago River? What would you like to see happen to kind of build on some of this momentum that we're seeing with the restoration of the Chicago River?
Yeah, related to the research project, our next steps are to try to pinpoint the habitat variables that are allowing some of those surprising species in the South Branch to reproduce. And once we can do that, we can then inform some restoration activities that are happening elsewhere in the river. More broadly, where would I like to see things go with the river? I think, one, the continuation of the Chicago River Swim is a great public engagement tool to get people talking about it, people looking at it in a way that's in a positive light. So I think those sort of events are great. From an organism side of things, I would love if we could start to see more top predators in the system. The more we see top predators, things like walleye or northern pike or short-nosed gar, the more we can see these big fish that are consuming other fish, the more that tells us that the ecosystem is healthy and able to feed many mouths, and being able to feed a longer food chain can speak to how healthy the ecosystem is. So those are a couple of the next steps and future directions I'd like or am excited to see the Chicago River go towards.
All right, Austin Happel from the Shed Aquarium. Thanks so much for your time and for joining us today on Chicago Live.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for chatting.
All right, time is now 2:51. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back with much more. All right, time is now 2:53. We want to update you on a story that came out of the Chicago Tribune. It is from a Chicago Tribune investigation, and we're exposing some disturbing allegations from a woman that was an inmate at the Logan Correctional Center. Not only does she say she was sexually abused by staff, but also that she faced some retaliation when she tried to report that alleged abuse to the authorities there. We're now joined by Elizabeth Payne. She is the legal director representing some of the inmates in this story. Thanks so much for your time here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Elizabeth, can you just walk us through a little bit of this case of the first woman who first shared her story, and also what happened after she tried to report her alleged assault?
So we've actually filed 7 different lawsuits today, and they were filed all at the same time. One was filed on Friday, and the rest were filed today. Many of them have experienced serious retaliation after coming forward, including some being issued false disciplinary tickets, being put in segregation. One woman was sexually abused by her supervisor on her job in the prison kitchen, and when she reported it, she was fired from her job. So the amount of retaliation that people have experienced has been truly awful. Another woman, after she reported, her room was ransacked by corrections staff, and she had her mother had recently passed away, and she had been unable to attend her mother's funeral because she was in custody. And she, as a result, created some t-shirts in memoriam of her mother, and the shirts were taken away in the ransacking of her room.
And I've also learned by reading this article that some of the correctional officers who actually work in the internal affairs unit are accused of playing a role in this alleged abuse there. Why is that detail so important in this case?
Yeah, so 3 of the women were abused by current or former internal affairs investigators. And the reason that's significant is because internal affairs of the prison holds an enormous amount of power over the women, and their job, part of their job, is to investigate misconduct by prison staff, including sexual abuse of people in custody. So the people who are supposed to be investigating and preventing sexual abuse of people in custody, some of them are actually perpetrating that very abuse.
And we do know that in a previous case, $20 million was awarded in a previous case against the Logan Correctional Facility. That's obviously not related to this case, but have we heard anything from the Illinois Department of Corrections? Have they responded to this lawsuit so far? What are we hearing from them?
We've not heard anything. One of the reasons this lawsuit was brought, my co-counsel on the case at the Uptown People's Law Center, Nicole Schultz, was an attorney in that past lawsuit against Logan Correctional Center. And I think there was certainly a hope after such a large verdict and decisive outcome that there would be real reform and change at Logan. And since that time, almost all of these incidents have occurred after that verdict came in. So the issue continues to be very widespread. And that's just, scratching the surface on how big the problem is. We did an open records request to Logan Correctional Center and learned that in the past 4 years, there have been 85 reports of sexual abuse by prison staff against people in custody, and only 6 of those resulted in disciplinary action at Logan.
And we also understand that some of the women bringing these complaints are still incarcerated. What's been done with them in the meantime while they wait for this case to play out? And obviously they're alleging that there's been retaliation in the past for speaking out.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Logan Correctional is one of the only 2 women's prisons in Illinois, and some of the women who are there and some of the women involved in this case are eligible to be moved to the other prison. And because their abusers have not been terminated or disciplined, They still work at the very prison where the abuse occurred and where their victims are still residing. So it's a serious problem, and a lot of the women are extremely scared.
Elizabeth, what's next in this case? We're running out of time here, but could you summarize what's gonna happen next? We got about 30, 45 seconds or so.
Sure. Yeah, so there's a lot of logistical preliminary things that happen in a lawsuit, including filing of various responses and answers, and discovery and depositions. Typically, these suits take many years to resolve. So it's going to be a long journey for the women and their families.
All right. Elizabeth Payne, the legal director who is representing some of the inmates on a story that was first uncovered by the Chicago Tribune, alleging some disturbing allegations from women at the Loyola Correctional Center who say that they were not only sexually abused by staff, but also they faced retaliation when they tried to report it. Elizabeth, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. We were just joined by Elizabeth Payne. We will definitely continue to follow that story throughout the day here on Fox 32 Chicago. Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of Chicago Live. We'll see you right back here, same time, same place, tomorrow at 1 p.m.
Mr. President, from York to New York, from Birmingham, England to Birmingham, Alabama, we are united by a common language and shared heritage. The many thousands of people from each of our countries who have made the other their home have enriched our societies immeasurably, a fact that gives me the greatest pride. Our cultural connections, too, continue to flourish with our actors, musicians, writers, and television presenters prospering in the hearts of transatlantic audiences. Today, our alliance spans every field of endeavor and shows vast potential for growth. The United Kingdom was your partner in the first trade deal of your administration, Mr. President, bringing jobs and growth to both our countries. And no doubt we can go even further as we build this new era of our partnership. Our two nations have an exceptional legacy of shared discovery. Together we laid the foundations of nuclear science, mapped the human genome, and built the internet, upon which all contemporary commerce, communication, and defense is based. Together, our scientists and engineers are shaping the world of tomorrow, not least with new partnership agreements on technology and the prosperity that stands to bring. Our countries have the closest defense, security, and intelligence relationship ever known. In 2 world wars, we fought together to defeat the forces of tyranny. Today, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in support of Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace. And our AUKUS submarine partnership with Australia sets the benchmark for innovative and vital collaboration. The successes of the British Redcoats and of George Washington's Continental Army today stand shoulder to shoulder, brothers and sisters in arms, protecting the freedoms we both cherish. Our countries are working together in support of crucial diplomatic efforts, not least of which, Mr. President, is your own personal commitment to finding solutions to some of the world's most intractable conflicts in order to secure peace. In striving for a better world, we also have a precious opportunity to safeguard and to restore the wonders and beauty of nature for the generations who follow us. We share the ambition and determination to preserve our majestic lands and waters, above all, to ensure that we have clean water, clean air, and clean food. Our legacy for the next 250 years and beyond is to ensure that our children, grandchildren, and those who come after them can experience the awe and magnificence of the natural treasures found in the countryside, on the coasts, in the seas, and in the national parks established by your predecessors and mine. Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, the bond between our two nations is indeed a remarkable one. Forged in the fire of conflict, it has been fortified through our shared endeavors and burnished by the deep affection between our people. Tested time and again, it has borne the weight of our common purpose and raised our ambition for a better world. So, in renewing our bond tonight, we do so with unshakable trust in our friendship and in our shared commitment to independence and liberty. Therefore, as we celebrate this unparalleled partnership, allow me to propose a toast to President Trump and the First Lady, and to the health, prosperity, and happiness of the people of the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Your Majesty, Melania and I are deeply grateful to you and Queen Camilla for your extraordinary graciousness. And to William and Kate, thank you so much. It's been so great being with you today. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's a singular privilege to be the first American president welcomed here. And if you think about it, it's a lot of presidents, and this was the second state visit, and that's the first, and maybe that's going to be the last time. I hope it is, actually. But this is truly one of the highest honors of my life. Such respect for you and such respect for your country. For many decades, His Majesty the King has epitomized the fortitude, nobility, and the spirit of the British monarchy and the British people. He's dedicated himself to preserving the glory and unique character of this kingdom restoring life to the rivers and streams, supporting the works of its artists and composers, planting trees and gardens in its countryside. And I just visited one of the most beautiful I've ever seen that you just completed, and protecting the architectural integrity of cities, villages, and towns. He has uplifted the poor, cared for rural farmers, and tended to wounded veterans like nobody else. I'll tell you that I just stood in line and shook about 150 hands, and the king knew every single person and every single company, and some of them had bad names like XYZ-Q3, and he knew every one of them, or at least I think he did, because nobody was complaining. I was very impressed with that. But I just want to say that His Majesty has also raised a remarkable son in His Royal Highness Prince of Wales. Really amazing. We've gotten to know you, and I think you're going to have an unbelievable success in the future. Melania and I are delighted to visit again with Prince William and to see Her Royal Highness Princess Catherine, so radiant and so healthy, so beautiful. It's really a great honor. Thank you. Many years ago, His Majesty opened his archives to a biographer. Among the documents was a letter from 1993 in which he described the patriotism and guided his many projects. He wrote that he was, quote, entirely motivated by a desperate desire to put the great back into Great Britain. In the finest tradition of British sovereigns, he has given his whole heart, everything he's got, to those parts of Britain that are beyond the realm of mere legislation. It's not easy, but which define its essence and its virtue, its harmony, and its soul. It's an amazing calling, and there's nobody that's answered that calling like you have. A fifth of all of humanity speaks, writes, thinks, and prays in the language born on these isles and perfected in the pages of Shakespeare and Dickens and Tolkien, and Lewis, Orwell, and Kipling. Incredible people, unbelievable people like we have rarely seen before, probably won't see again. The lion-hearted people of this kingdom defeated Napoleon, unleashed the Industrial Revolution, destroyed slavery, and defended civilization in the darkest days of fascism and communism. The British gave the world the Magna Carta, the modern parliament, and Francis Bacon's scientific method. They gave us the works of Locke and Hobbes, Smith and Burke, Newton and Blackstone. The legal, intellectual, cultural, and political traditions of this kingdom have been among the highest achievements of mankind. There's really never been anything like it. The British Empire laid the foundations of law, liberty, free speech, and individual rights virtually everywhere the Union Jack has ever flown, including a place called America. You know that place very well, don't you? His Majesty spoke eloquently about the bond which inspired Sir Winston Churchill, and the bust is in the Oval Office right now, the beautiful bust of Winston Churchill, to coin the phrase special relationship. But seen from American eyes, the word special does not begin to do it justice. We're joined by history and fate, and by love and language, and by transcendent ties of culture, tradition, ancestry, and destiny. We're like two notes in one chord, or two verses